Cyber risks are among an organization's highest priorities, and the threat keeps increasing. A fact that has been highlighted by the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Report since early 2020. Now, this challenge is dynamic. The evolution of the digital landscape and infrastructure, driven by the disruption of connectivity and emerging technologies, has vastly complexified the threat landscape and the cyber risks organizations face. Now, recognizing that individuals and organizations cannot prevent all malicious attacks or cyber failures, while embracing the opportunities that digitization brings in, has led to the rise of cyber resilience. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Analytics Insight podcast, where we dive deep into the innovations shaping our world today. And I'm your host, Priya Dayalani. Now, with the proliferation of advanced technologies such as AI and the increasingly frequency and sophistication of attacks like ransomware, the cybersecurity paradigm has been getting redefined each day. But now we are progressing towards next gen cyber resiliency. What does this exactly mean, and how can one build a robust cyber resilience framework? Joining us today is Darren Thomson, Field Chief Technology Officer, EMEA and India at Commvault. Hi, Darren, how are you doing?
Hello, Priya. I'm very well. Thank you for having me.
Great. It's a pleasure to have you with us, Darren. And of course, we are going to touch upon a very crucial and critical topic in today's digital landscape. But before we dive deeper into our main agenda, I think we would like to know more about Commvault. So, can you help us understand more about the organization, its specialization?
Yeah, certainly. Probably worth just talking a little bit about Commvault's history. So one of Commvault's real benefits, I think, is that been around quite a long time now, and most of the 25 plus years that it has been working with customers around the world, its mission has been to protect data. And so Commvault is probably known by most people as a backup and recovery company. That's kind of how it developed its business and what it specialized in the past. Over the past few years, Commvault has recognized that traditional backup and recovery technique, traditional disaster recovery technique, really isn't enough, is not fit for purpose when it comes to some of the emerging and existing threats. In fact, some of the ones that you mentioned, Priya, including ransomware. If we think about how a ransomware attack unfolds and the effect that it has on companies, you need an awful lot more now than a second or third copy of data to restore to your organization. You need to specify precisely how that should be prioritized. You need to make sure that data is clean and that you're not restoring, for example, in the case of ransomware, the malware just on top of clean systems. You need to be accommodating for cloud as well as on-prem and any sort of combination of those as well. And overall, what we're finding our customers want to do is reduce the typical 24 days it would take subsequent to a cyber attack to restore the business. And that's very much what Commvault are focused on today.
That's truly insightful. I think Commvault's experience in data protection, backup, and recovery has been instrumental in helping businesses navigate the complexities of modern data management. And it is an era where data is one of the most valuable assets, and of course, having a robust tech partner, a security partner, and along with a strategy is more important than ever, I believe. Now, if you talk about you, Darren, I think you have more than 35 years of experience in the technology industry. You're a seasoned business leader with expertise in IT, strategy, risk management, and cybersecurity. So, can you tell us more about yourself, Darren? How has your journey been till date? And, what exactly is your role at a Commvault? And, what triggered your interest at Commvault?
Yeah, certainly. I won't, with somebody with my years of tenure, it can take hours to describe my history. So I'll try not to dwell too much on that and focus more on the Commvault role. But my background, as you rightly say, is about 35 years now in mainly software technology. Most of those 35 years have been spent, I would say, focused on digital risk of some perspective. So now that's cyber resilience. Previously, I served as the CTO in the field at Symantec Corporation, where obviously we were very focused at Symantec on specifically cybersecurity. I spent time in my years as a disaster recovery architect and as an expert in fault tolerance systems. And prior to joining Commvault, and actually what largely led me to Commvault, was I spent 4 years in the cyber insurance markets. My role there was to help the insurance companies, who at that time were not cyber security experts, really understand cyber risk from the perspective of the actuarial science. So, as many of your listeners will know, the way insurance works is there is a thing called actuarial science, and that really is the mathematics and analytics behind measuring and pricing risk. That was tough to do a few years ago for cyber insurance because there really wasn't enough history for the insurers to lean on. And so I helped to shape that industry in some way by defining what cyber catastrophes could look like, what they could mean, what the underlying principles of those might be, what controls really mattered. And I left that 4 years, very enjoyable 4 years, taking a really different perspective for me on this topic, really with a conclusion, which I'm sure we'll talk more about, Priya. And the conclusion really was we've spent an awful lot of time as security specialists over the past, let's say, 15 years, focused on what I would term blocking and tackling. So trying to stop the attack. And if we can't stop the attack, trying to detect the attack on our network so that we can do something about it. And there are really good reasons to be doing those things. But my observation, having seen well over 300 breaches in my time now, is that more often than not, the breach is inevitable. And what companies really lack and what's driving, upwards of 24, 25, 26 days of downtime subsequent to an attack is a lack of a good recovery plan, a cyber recovery plan, an inability really for people to understand their roles properly, a lack of process definition, a lack of testing is a very, very sort of big contributor here as well, and really a lack of understanding about what's really required to recover from something like a ransomware attack. So when I looked around the markets coming out of cyber insurance, I wanted to get back into software again. The company that really stood out in terms of their focus and the attention that they're putting on all of those things was Commvault. And that's really what led me to my role here. I lead a team of field CTOs across Europe, Middle East, Africa, and India. And our job really is largely around advising our customers at an executive level how to reshape their cyber resilience strategies and programs to really get them, fighting fit and ready to face off some of the attacks that they're experiencing right now.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate the depth of insights you have shared about your journey and, of course, your role at Commvault so far. It's really fascinating to hear about the ways in which your contributions are shaping the company's vision and impact. If we talk about preparing your customers in building a next level cyber resilience strategy. And of course, I'm coming to that now. I think the evolution of the cyber threat landscape has demanded a shift from traditional defensive controls to a very comprehensive cyber resilience strategy. Now, this strategic pivot reimagines conventional security measures as resilience enablers designed not only to prevent breaches but also to maintain and quickly restore operational effectiveness in the wake of cyber incidents. Now, data backup and encryption, for example, are now integral to ensuring data availability and integrity because it serves as a protective measure for a business continuity rather than mere safeguards against unauthorized access. Now, we have often discussed, cyber resiliency and why is it important, but now everybody's talking about the next gen cyber resiliency. So, what exactly is this next gen cyber resiliency, and why is it important to have that implemented across organizations in today's digital world?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the way that I'm sort of used to describing the difference between next generation cyber resiliency and where we've come from really is by thinking about kind of four key pillars. One of the things that we're seeing, by the way, right now is a necessary coming together of traditional infrastructure skills, strategy, and planning. So infrastructure would be, the people in the organization normally under the CIO, who are responsible for things like backup and recovery, responsible for the deployment of infrastructure, whether that be in the cloud or whether that be on premise, deployment of applications, and so on. Now, that organization is necessarily needing to get closer now to the security organization, who has traditionally, of course, been the protectors of all of that, right? So in charge of cyber defense and security planning and strategy. In many organizations, we see those two organizations operating quite separately and actually with quite distinct cultures in many cases. We're seeing a necessary coming together of those organizations. If you think about what's necessary for next generation cyber resilience, it really is a combination of what the CISO and their team would do and what the CIO and their team would do. And we really define all of that in four key pillars, really, when we define cyber resilience. The first of which is security. So it's obviously it sounds obvious, but we need to be securing our most important assets. We need to be understanding the threat landscape that surrounds us. We need to be deploying, as we traditionally have tried to do, effective cyber defense. There are, I think, very disruptive things going on in that space right now, and those disruptive things Commvault are very much taking consideration of and investing in very heavily. Number one of the gaps that's traditionally existed here is that the traditional security solutions, in my view, are not close enough to data. They're not seeing the small changes to data that can occur, not during an attack, but in the build up to an attack. Well, Commvault have the advantage that we've been looking after critical data workloads for 25 years, traditionally on-prem and now in the cloud. And so we do see those changes. We're embedding things like anomaly detection and threat detection inside the data protection architecture so that we can inform the security organization, SecOps, that we're seeing something strange. It may or may not be a cyber attack, but we're seeing something that we wouldn't expect to see. And that's proven to be extremely valuable and is in a very meaningful way lowering a risk posture as that pertains to data security. So security is the first one. The second one is recovery. Okay, so almost as obvious. This is really the old realm of people like Commvault, but the ability to recover data. The big change here is that recovering data is just not enough. Traditional disaster recovery methods, backup and recovery methods, do not really cut the mustard when it comes to a malware attack of any kind. And the reason for that is because the cyber criminals very often are going after the backups. They're going after the disaster recovery sites. And so very often, and I've experienced this time and time again, an organization would go to their DR plan to recover from, let's say, a ransomware attack, only to find that in restoring the data from their backups, that data in itself has it been corrupted. And so essentially they have no backup. That's a very big problem today. And so this whole area of recovery now is turning into something much more to do with cleaning data. How can we be 100% confident that the data that we restore when we restore applications and data either in the cloud or on-prem is clean and ready for the business to use? And that's a big challenge. And there are some disruptive technologies that we're investing in very heavily to help with that. The third area after security and recovery is readiness. So are we ready? Because if the breach is inevitable, we need a plan in place. So what is that plan? What are the people, the processes, the technologies required so that when the worst happens to us, we know exactly what steps 1, 2, and 3 are. We know who the team are. We know where our critical assets are. We know that our data is clean in certain environments, ready to be restored. And very importantly, and this is a topic that I'm talking a lot about with customers right now, we know what our minimal viable company looks like. In other words, we know the assets necessary that need to come back immediately so that we can, in the best possible way, recover from this incident. So that's all about readiness. So security, recovery, readiness, and then the last pillar is what we call rebalance. And this is really about being nimble, being portable, the ability to move data sets around based on what it is we need right now. So it may be that subsequent to some sort of an attack, I need to take a workload and move that to the cloud, or move it back from the cloud, or move it from one cloud provider to another cloud provider, or move an application that's traditionally been on-prem to a different kind of infrastructure. So at Commvault, we're very much heavily kind of investing in this rebalance idea. So those are the 4 pillars: security, recovery, readiness, and rebalance. Those together form the way in which we define cyber resilience.
Well, absolutely. And I think, thank you for sharing those deep insights around the next gen cyber resilience strategy and, of course, and sharing the Commvault's 4 pillars around how the next gen cyber resiliency is built. And of course, cyber resilience has been a topic that has been widely discussed, but I believe that the next gen cyber resilience takes it to an entirely next level. I think it's no longer just about defending against threats. It's about anticipating them, adapting in real time, and ensuring business continuity despite the ever evolving cyber risks. And of course, let's not forget the role of AI and automation in this evolution, because the digitization wave sweeping across industries has significantly increased the demand for robust security measures. Now, while AI contributes to the complexity of security threats, it also presents an opportunity to effectively counter those threats. Now, for example, AI can help with a faster malware detection, phishing detection, or network security, endpoint security, and much more. So, I want to understand from you, Darren, how do you think AI and automation are playing a role in shaping this next wave of next gen cyber resilience?
Yeah, it's a question that often comes up and something that's very much front of mind for me and for Commvault. I mean, what I'd like to say first of all is that AI is an important trend. It is one of several mega trends, I think, that are really happening to us right now, that represent very much double-edged swords. So if I think about things like even cloud computing, software supply chain, social media, AI and machine learning, hybrid working. These are all massive trends that are occurring around the world and are playing both for good and for bad. In every single one of those cases, there are potentially enormous advantages to business in leveraging those technologies and those approaches. But equally, the criminals are very excited about them as well. You know, myself and my team spend way too much time looking at what criminals are doing and their behaviors and what they're excited about and how they're investing their time and energies. And all of those mega trends that I mentioned are very much in scope for how criminals are investing right now. AI arguably is probably got the most focus. In particular right now, machine learning and its capabilities around pattern recognition. And on the criminal side, right now, that's being used very much to give kind of a supercharge element to things like ransomware. So one of the dynamics that we see in terms of the threat landscape right now is we don't really see threat types change very often. So I was talking about ransomware 10 years ago, and I'm still talking about ransomware now. If we think about distributed denial of service attacks, data exfiltration, these are all attack types that really don't change very often. We don't see an awful lot of change there. What we see is underlying change and an underpinning change across all of those threat types, largely now fueled by AI and machine learning. So those technologies are being used by criminals to supercharge the sorts of attacks, the attack types that we're all very used to, like ransomware, for example. What does AI and machine learning do for something like ransomware? Well, it allows criminals to massively scale. It allows them to essentially source, petabytes and petabytes of data and use that data to make their attacks a lot more focused and allow the blast radius of those attacks to be a lot more impactful. Essentially allows them to do their job better. Now, it is a double-edged sword because we're trying to do the same thing on the good side. So, obviously businesses are leveraging things like large language models, etc., more and more, and there's an enormous potential advantage to leveraging AI and machine learning in business. There's also a specific use case for AI and machine learning on the cyber defense side and within cyber resilience. So Commvault, for example, are very heavily invested, have been now for well over 10 years in AI technology. It helps us to recognize patterns in data. It allows us to do things like anomaly detection. It allows us to search for things like zero-day attacks. It allows us to show what a typical data profile looks like and where the anomalies in that might be that could lead to an attack. So, there are organizations around the world leveraging AI for good, and in the cyber resilience domain, that's an incredibly important play. So it's a double-edged sword. Both sides are investing. It's somewhat of an unfair battle, of course, because the criminals have no legislation, no compliance to think about. They're not regulated in any way, and typically, on the good side, we are. But nevertheless, this is a really, really important field and something that Commvault are heavily invested in.
Right, I agree with you that when you talk about AI, I think it's a double-edged sword. But eventually, I think it definitely plays a very important role. Not just when you're talking about cyber resiliency and ensuring cybersecurity, but it is definitely playing an important role in amplifying the productivity that we need in today's a digital landscape. And if you talk about AI and automation, they're not just standalone solutions. So I think that they both together can enhance your cyber resilience strategy. Moving ahead, earlier, you mentioned about that one thing that you came across is that, people didn't have a proper recovery plan, or they lacked a testing solutions when it comes to cyber resilience. Now, if I want to ask, it is like, is my organization cyber resilient? Now, of course, there is no one size fits all answer to this question. You might already have several systems in place that will help you counter cyber threats. However, a cyber resiliency plan should consider recovery as well as prevention. Now, if we talk on a macro level, when we talk about ensuring a complete protection, I think business leaders and C-level executives of organizations should identify the most critical functions of the business, and all such functions must be protected to keep the business operational, intact during an attack. So a lot of things come into picture when we are talking about, building. A robust cyber resilience strategy. But we want to understand from you what steps enterprises should take in order to build a cyber resilience framework that aligns with their business continuity goals.
Yeah, another great question, Priya. Thank you. So let me premise this by saying there are a couple of principles I think that are incredibly important when people think about building a cyber resilience and a cyber recovery plan. So let me go through those principles first of all. They're quite high level, and then we'll get into the plan itself. So principle number one: disaster recovery does not equal cyber recovery. That's a really, really important one, and it's still not well understood in businesses today. I visit companies all the time that are relying on their disaster recovery plan to help them in the event of a cyber attack. That doesn't work. I saw that lots and lots of times when I was in cyber insurance. Why doesn't it work? Well, it doesn't work because disaster recovery architecture was built on the premise of some sort of physical disaster. The idea was data center one has a problem, a flood, something, an explosion, whatever that might be. So we fail over all of our technology to data center two, we replicate data from one side to the other, and so we have a disaster recovery plan. That architecture, that principle in technology relies on a very, very big assumption. And it was an assumption that was okay 20 years ago, but is not okay now. And that assumption is that the data that we're replicating from side A to side B is clean. And that is not ever the case now. Right? The criminal is probably already infected your disaster recovery site. They've probably infected your backup. And if you're doing any kind of synchronous data replication, the likelihood is you're replicating the problem from one site to another. And so, we see again and again organizations who lean on a disaster recovery plan in the event of a cyber attack, then endure lots and lots of downtime because they don't get back that way. So cyber recovery, different to disaster recovery. And part of that is because, part of cyber recovery is security, it's forensics, it's cleaning data, making sure that we have isolated recovery environments and things like clean rooms that we can recover data from and that we can test recovery from pre-attack. So that's principle number one. Cyber recovery is not disaster recovery. Principle number two: minimal viable company. It's very, very important for people to understand in business that if the aspiration is that all of the business subsequent to a ransomware attack should come online at the same time, and that should be within hours, that is not realistic. That is somewhat delusional, particularly in larger organizations where we're talking about thousands of applications, probably a hybrid environment between cloud and on-premise, lots of complexity, lots of supply chains, interdependencies, very, very, almost impossible to get to the point where you can instantaneously bring everything back. Therefore, it's very important to create a scope that is realistic in terms of a prioritized recovery. So what are the systems, applications, processes that we need back immediately subsequent to an attack, so that whilst we're building the rest of the business back, the business can actually operate? At Commvault, we call that minimal viable company. That needs to be carefully defined by the technologists and the strategists that are building a cyber recovery plan, so that we can deal with prioritization in the right way. So that's principle number 2, minimal viable company. Principle number 3, we mentioned it earlier, is, we have got to kind of, if you think about something like the NIST framework, where we talk about identify, protect, detect, respond and recover, there's got to be a lot more attention in our cyber recovery plan on the respond and recover. Most security ops environments, most SecOps, are doing a pretty good job at protect and detect, at least the best they can, against a really threatening landscape. However, with all of that, the breach is somewhat inevitable. And so we've got to shift right when it comes to the NIST framework, for example, and really focus in on respond and recover. So those are the principles. Now, in terms of the recovery plan itself, we've actually built a model at Commvault, and I run workshops with our clients all the time to help them build out an effective cyber recovery plan. Essentially, we talk about the recovery plan itself having a structure of 5 phases. Those phases are prepare, immediate response, recovery, reintegration, and continuous improvement. So those 5 steps capture a lot of things, probably too many things to go through on this podcast, Priya, but, very, very quickly, prepare is all about getting the team ready, understanding a minimal viable company, defining playbooks and processes, and exhaustively testing our recovery plan using technologies like clean rooms, for example, and air gap data. Immediate response is, what do we do immediately? What things do we need to write down? Who do we inform? Who are the stakeholders that need to be informed? Where is the plan? Who's going to execute the plan? Who's going to be in charge? And things of that nature. Recovery, fairly obvious. This is about getting that clean data back for those prioritized applications as quickly as possible. Reintegration is about continuing down that cleanliness route, making sure that before we reintroduce systems to the environment, that they are absolutely clean of malware and they're not going to reintroduce problems. A big area of focus for Commvault right now is Active Directory, the protection of Active Directories and the cleanliness of Active Directories. All too often, I've seen people go to their plan, they bring their Active Directory back as a priority because clearly that's where identities live and how people get to log on again. And what they do is they reintroduce the very identity, for example, the criminal used in the first place to attack the business. That's bad. That just gets you back to square one and you start your recovery plan all over again. And we see an awful lot of time wasted like that and downtime for the business. So reintegration is about making sure we're 100% positive and clean in terms of our data, so we know when we reintegrate our apps on a prioritized basis, they're not going to hurt us again. And then lastly, continuous improvement is about what were the lessons that we learned and how can we feed those back into the plan, because this really is a continuous improvement process.
Well, that was amazing, Darren. Thank you for helping us understand some critical aspects as to how one can build a robust cyber resilience framework. And I very much liked your aspect that disaster recovery is not the solution for any cyber attack, and it's really important to keep on evolving as even the cyber attacks are evolving and becoming more sophisticated. So it's really important that enterprises proactively design their strategies, not only to ensure and safeguard their data, but also to ensure that they have a seamless business continuity. Cyber resilience is I think it is rapidly becoming a crucial aspect of a modern digital landscape. But I guess due to its complexity, I think there are various misconceptions that create a fog of misunderstanding about it. Now, if you talk about, you mentioned it rightly, that an effective cyber resilience management, it's you need to be able to anticipate, prepare, respond, and adapt to the cyber threats while ensuring and protecting your business operations. But I think one of the most common misconceptions that I've come across, I guess, is that cybersecurity and cyber resilience are used interchangeably, like these terms. But I very well know that these are both different concepts. So what's that one cybersecurity, or probably a couple of cybersecurity myths that you think are prevailing in industry, and you would like to debunk that today?
Yeah, look, I think it's a really interesting point, and I agree. Those terms are very often interchanged. Look, my pretty simple view of competencies that are required to build truly comprehensive cyber resilience is that is traditional backup and recovery coming together with traditional SecOps. It's those two things together that make cyber resilience. So do we need to do things like backup and recovery? Absolutely. But we can't do backup and recovery without forensics so that we know those recoveries are clean. Well, that's a security job, right? So what Commvault are attempting to do now is to embed some security technology into a data protection product, which is our Commvault Cloud product. But very importantly, and possibly one of the most important things that we're doing is we're also creating links, APIs, and integrations between the Commvault Cloud platform and the security vendors, because there is a two-way handoff that needs to occur there. We can tell a security product when something looks wrong in data because we're so used to looking at data trends, protecting workloads, etc. We know that, and we know that across hybrid workloads. We know that across all of the major cloud infrastructures, all of the major on-prem applications. We've been doing this for a very long time, so we can bring value to SecOps by saying, look, there's something wrong in the data here. We're seeing changes we wouldn't expect. Maybe something being encrypted. Maybe there's a type mismatch in a file type or something like that. Once we've handed that off to the SOC, now the SOC can do the forensics work that it's so good at. It can start to analyze and use its tools to define what the best next steps are. And then the handoff comes back because it can then instruct the backup world, if you like, the backup and recovery world. Well, actually, yeah, this does look like a threat. I'd like you to take a clean backup and replace that thing that you've seen with a clean version. So there you get an idea for how these worlds need to come together. Cyber resilience does not equal cyber security in the same way it doesn't equal backup and recovery. It's both of those worlds coming together to create a comprehensive resilience framework. That's kind of how I look at that.
Well, yes, I think we definitely gain a different perspective towards cyber resilience today, and looking at, I think the importance of cyber resilience will only grow because with the rise of AI-driven attacks, I think it's really important that businesses adopt a proactive strategy, and then it's becoming critical than ever. So I think if you want to wrap up our today's discussion, I think cyber resilience isn't a one-time project; it's a continuous journey because it requires commitment from leadership, investment in the right technologies, and a culture of security awareness across the entire organization. And in an increasingly digital world, I think resilience is a key to maintaining trust, ensuring business continuity, and of course, safeguarding the future. Thank you so much, Darren, for helping us understand that cyber resilience is not just an IT issue or a new IT term, but it's a business imperative in today's world. And organizations that invest in resilience today will be the ones that survive and thrive in the face of tomorrow's cyber threats.
No problem at all. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Darren. It was lovely chatting with you. And this is for our listeners. Thank you for tuning into today's episode. And, if you found this discussion valuable, don't forget to share this episode with your network. Until then, stay curious, stay innovative, and keep embracing the future of AI. You can view all our previous podcasts on Spotify and other leading platforms. Thank you so much.